Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio here on this Monday, July 31st. Appreciate you joining us. Dustin Dopirak with me right now. Last week, Big Ten had their football media days and kind of closed it out for, I think that's pretty much it for all conferences. Now that should be wrapped up. And the thing about this year, this is the last year of divisions in the Big Ten. This is the last year without UCLA and USC in the Big Ten, but more importantly, the divisions. Indiana gets unshackled from having to play USC, UCLA. I mean
Ohio State and Michigan.
Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State. Did we lose Dustin?
Yeah, I believe he accidentally disconnected. I'm sure he'll be back with us shortly. But yeah, definitely going to be a bit of a gift for Indiana football, no matter what the circumstances are and what the results are for this coming season.
Well, I don't know if you call it a gift. My God, it's they're just getting killed right now. I mean,
yeah, I hate to say that anybody deserves an easy schedule, but from what Indiana has had to endure from the program, from their stance, the fact that in year one of the new divisions that they're not getting shafted by the conferences, honestly, it's one, it's a surprise, and two, it really is a gift that you avoid the two biggest powers and you avoid having to travel to the West Coast in the first year of it.
Absolutely, and 5 out of the last 7 years, I think, Dustin, Indiana has opened with a Big Ten opponent. That is like unbelievably crazy. I don't understand the point of that.
Yeah, sorry, I got kicked off there. I get it because obviously the Big Ten is just doing it as a conference, and they're not necessarily taking it easy on Indiana. And some of the years it's been good, So some of the years that last year, they beat. It was last year they beat Illinois out of the gate, right? I'm like confusing my years at this point, but I think. Yeah, because Bazelak had a big day and Camper had a big day. Sometimes it's good for them. Sometimes it's good for them to get out of the gate and go get a Big Ten win, and all of a sudden, hey, you're got some real momentum. It's not the same as just going and beating an FCS opponent. It can be good for them, and I think it gets them on TV sometimes, or gets them in a prominent position on TV. This year, obviously, you get Ohio State out of the gate. That's a tougher deal. But, I get why the Big Ten made the move in the first place to say, like, we're going to get out there as a league so that we're playing conference games, the first weekend. And we're not, we are pushing our teams to go schedule spotlight games. Either A, you get, this conference game and you're going to be on TV, or you go get some major thing. Like we're going to try to minimize the amount of teams that on week one are playing an FCS opponent or a mid-major opponent or whatever. Like we're getting into the mix immediately. I get the logic of that. I get the reasoning to say, we're going to jump out there, make our teams jump out there on Labor Day weekend and, have games that people are making a point to go watch rather than saying, okay, we're going to ease into this and you're going to start playing games that matter at the end of September. I get where they were coming from on that.
Absolutely. And with IU football, Tom Allen.
Am I cutting out or are you cutting out?
No, it's me just hesitating. With the season, with the schedule, we know is going to become much easier next year. Does that give Tom Allen the next year or not? I still think you mentioned it. He's got to win 5 games, and I agree. There has to be this feeling that it's close for him to go forward, or I'm not sure what that they will do next. They may have to do something. Of course, we're at the beginning of the season, so there's no point in talking about that now. But I'm just curious, just thinking this, looking forward, I'm sure Tom Allen would sure say, hey man, give me a shot with not having to have this schedule around my neck, and I would get it.
Did I get cut off? I'm back.
I think
So,
that was you that time. But
okay.
and shout out to Balin. How about Balin G coming listening, watching from Greece? Man, I wish I was on one of the gondola. We were on one of the gondolas right now. Be just
I thought that was a
going
Venice
along.
thing.
Well, wherever. That's
One of those
yeah,
peninsular countries out in the
somewhere in the Mediterranean.
where civilization was built. I don't know. So
Yeah, but I was talking about how Tom Allen, if he doesn't get that a season next year, that's got to be really hard on him to think, man, it would have been nice to have a run, not having to play Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State every year.
yeah, no, I mean that would go a long way. I mean, I think he's ultimately not going to be judged this year on what happens in those games. I think that's one big piece. I mean, and you know, because I haven't been covering them, I've removed myself a little bit from this discussion in terms of, you know, I got to be reminded, like, what's his buyout down to now, or what's it going to be at the end of this year? You know, and so how like are they going to be able to go through a bad year 3? You know, can they do 3-9 and bring him back? You know, can they do 4-8 and bring him back? I don't know. I mean, that'd be 3 brutal years in a row. You know, and it's tough to come back from that, regardless of who you're playing or what your schedule looks like. Like it's tough to be able to continue to recruit the more you lose, and the more players you get. So I mean, I think I mean, I'm sure that if they do let him go and there's a change of direction there, that will be tough for him to say, man, it would have been nice to have a year where I don't have this. And you look at the schedule for 24, and it does, you know, play out for them nice. Obviously, we like don't have the dates yet as far as the Big Ten is concerned, but obviously know the opponents and the locations. And you're looking at, you know, Maryland, Minnesota, you know, Purdue, Michigan State, Nebraska, Northwestern, and Wisconsin. I mean, you got Penn State, Wisconsin, you know, UCLA, and all those are pretty tough looking. But you know, Maryland, Minnesota, Purdue, Michigan State, Nebraska, Northwestern, those are all doable. You know, those are all, you know, conceivably winnable games. That doesn't mean you're going to get them all, but like it's conceivable. You look at this year's schedule, and it's obviously a little bit tougher. So, you know, where are we at here? Let's look at this. You know, you certainly have Penn State, Ohio State, you know, Michigan as usual in the East. He can win enough games this year, you know, that aren't those games that, you know, that gets you to stick around. You know, if you get Indiana State, if you get Louisville, if you get Akron, if you get Maryland, if you get Rutgers, if you get Illinois, if you get Michigan State, that's probably enough. You know, that's probably enough to keep you around. And those aren't beating superpower teams. You know, like there are enough winnable games on the board to keep you in office. And so that's the big thing there, but it's just, are they good enough to win those? And if it's ultimately a question of, you know, it's not that you weren't good enough to beat Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, it's that you weren't good enough to beat Illinois, Rutgers, and Maryland. And you know, if that's the case, then you can't sit there and say, well, if I had this scheduled that next year I'd have been golden. No, like if you can't beat those teams now, who's to say you're gonna be able to beat them next year? You know, what reason is there if you're Scott Dolson making that decision, and Tom Allen, you know, has this imaginary, you know, argument with you about why he deserves to stay. You know, if you're not beating the Illinois, the Rutgers, and the Marylands this year, why should I trust that you're going to beat Michigan State, Nebraska, and Minnesota next year? Like, what's my rationale? That yeah, your schedule's easier, but you haven't proven you can beat the teams you need to beat this year. Why would I trust that you can do it next year?
Absolutely. And how is this going to change the Big Ten now, doing away with these divisions? Because it has really, it's hamstrung half of the Big Ten East, whether it's Indiana, Maryland, Rutgers, when those teams have to play those other 4 teams every year, and then likely Wisconsin or Iowa. I mean, that is a beat down that very few programs have to take.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, and what it's created is this scenario where, you know, the Big Ten West has this sort of rotating, you know, group of teams that come through. You know, like you've obviously had all these different this pretty set dynamic for the entirety of the East-West, dynamic, is that, like there is this arms race in the East where it's Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, and they have been the powerhouses of the whole league, and they have been the teams that have been challenging. Every year they beat the crap out of each other, and whoever comes out of that usually goes to the playoffs. Mostly it's been Ohio State, but it's been Michigan. Penn State's been close. They obviously won the Big Ten in 2016. They've been kind of on the precipice there. Ohio State and Michigan have been beyond them, but they've been sort of the clear third power in the league. And on the flip side, you have this Big Ten West where everybody's basically had a crack at it. I mean, I'm not sure who hasn't. I guess Nebraska. I don't know who hasn't won the West at least once in the time that there's been a West. I'm not sure if anybody has failed entirely to win the division. I'd have to go look at it. Maybe Minnesota hasn't, or did they win a couple years ago when they were really good? So it's allowed for each of those teams to have a period where a really good season that they could point to in these years. And meanwhile, in the East, you've had Maryland, Rutgers, and Indiana who have been buried. And that had they been in the West, they would have had a crack at it. Somewhere in that period, they would have had a crack at winning a division and going to a conference championship game, and likely getting blown out. I mean, obviously, what's certainly happened in the same way is while the West has been able to, rotate who's the best and had this sort of like king of the hill thing where everybody climbs up and is king for a day. They all go to Indianapolis in December and get the crap kicked out of them. Just mercilessly by Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, because they've just operating at a different scale. So how that dynamic is going to change is hard to say, especially if it's going to be a situation where you're going to have a 1 versus 2 playoff. You could continue to have a scenario where instead of it being, Ohio State kicks the crap out of Wisconsin or Iowa every year, or Northwestern for that matter, you have a scenario where it's Ohio State and Michigan every year, and it's just they play at the end of November and they have a rematch the following week. It's certainly possible that that's going to be the case. That's going to be the dynamic, but there's going to be all kinds of intermingling, and I mean, it makes things better for Indiana. I mean, I don't know if you're going to have that scenario where you're going to have somebody else get that other Big Ten championship spot on an annual basis. That there's going to be new teams that are going to have that experience. Again, it's nice to have that experience to be able to go play in it and say you're in a championship game, and then from there you get a spot in the Citrus Bowl, or you get a spot in the Outback Bowl or the Gator or whatever, and you get something prominent where you get to go to Florida and experience some sunshine in January, and it doesn't necessarily, like you've gone for a while without having something like that, and the winning the Big Ten West gives you an opportunity to do something like that. Where Indiana hasn't had as many of those. Certainly they had the couple in 2019 and 2020. But those teams at the bottom of the Big Ten East have had less access to something like that. But there's going to be more shakeup in the middle. You can be the 5th or 6th or 7th Big Ten team versus the 8th or 9th or 10th. In terms of just where you're shaking out. Obviously the playing in the Pac, bringing in those Pac-12 programs, the LA programs, is just going to change the whole dynamic of travel. And again, just having 2 programs that bring something totally different, have a totally different recruiting footprint, or have a totally different collection of history, that's going to be a whole different ball game. And obviously you're going to, USC is going to be in some of those championship games, so it's not going to be Ohio State, Michigan every year. But that's on the flip side, another tough 2 more tough teams that you got to play. And, you might not have both of them on your schedule every year, but you get one of them that fills in for maybe one of the teams that you take off from the East.